Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha Renee Perez, and I'm the Student Engagement Manager for the Campaign for College Opportunity. I want to thank you all for joining us for our second lunch series. We are so proud and excited to have our second lunch break guest, Mr. Steve Ngo. Steve has been a friend of the campaign's for years, starting when he was a trustee in San Francisco City College, where he was a strong supporter of Students Making a Change, commonly known as SMAC. Lena Carew, founder of SMAC, is now on our board. Currently, Steve is a partner at Lozano Smith LLP, at an education and public agency law firm. He began his legal career at Minami Tamaki LLP, a San Francisco law firm known for its civil rights work and community advocacy. He is a member of the Asian American Bar Association of the Greater Bay Area and the Board of Governors of the Alumni Association of Hastings Law School. In memory of his mother, Steve founded the FAM Fund at the Asian Women's Shelter to empower domestic violence survivors and their children by funding their educational goals. From 2009 to 2016, Steve served as a member of the Board of Trustees for the San Francisco Community College District. For his leadership on the board, Steve received awards from Coleman Advocates for Children and the San Francisco Family Support Network. Steve is a first-generation college graduate. He has a JD from Hastings, a master's in public policy from Georgetown, and a bachelor's from UCLA. Steve, we are so glad to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's always great to be with the campaign family. Hi, Sasha.
Okay. So before we get started, we want to see who is with us in the Zoom room today. So here's a quick survey for folks. If you all could take a moment to let us know what your role is in the higher education world and what region you're coming from. So go ahead and pause and give everyone a second to go ahead and take that survey. It should be on your screen now if you're on Zoom. All righty, I think we're probably gonna close the survey up. Great, so we can see we have a number of higher education advocates that are currently on the call, also a number of students and college faculty as well. And a lot of folks from the Bay Area, from Los Angeles, really exciting. I wanna thank everybody for participating. And as a reminder, we invite folks to pose questions in the Q&A box. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, and we'll have some time to ask those questions a bit later in the program. So welcome, Steve. I'm so happy to have you with us today. And I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about who you are. And I also want to thank you too for donating your lunch today to another student. We really appreciate that, and that was very kind of you.
Of course, and thank you for offering the lunch. And I'm happy happy a student could benefit from that. I appreciate again the invitation to join you for lunch. And hi everybody. Appreciate you taking time out of your day to learn a little bit about me and the commission, and also the work of the campaign. So I am a son of refugees. My family came here first to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, and they were sponsored by Catholic Charities to live in Lexington, Kentucky, which is where I was born. And I grew up in the South as part of a refugee family, and I, came into questions of justice pretty early from that vantage point. And eventually I made my way out to California Went to high school in the Inland Empire, San Bernardino, then ultimately to Menlo College, which is a private college up in Atherton, transferred to UCLA, worked in the state legislature for a year as an assembly fellow on the budget committee, went to grad school at Georgetown back in DC, and learned a lot about federal policymaking there, and decided to come to law school out here in San Francisco, and I've been in the Bay Area ever since. I'm, as you mentioned, I'm a first generation college graduate as well. I'm father of 2 young girls, married to a San Francisco native, and we're making trying to make a life here in San Francisco.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that you're originally from Kentucky. That's amazing.
A lot of people say that, and they usually ask about the accent, Southern accent too, but I regret that I lost the accent at some point when I was around 12 or 13, so.
Oh, I was about to ask. Well, what made you decide to lean into the higher education space and to get involved?
Well, as I mentioned, part of my early experience was just growing up in a refugee family in the South, and in New Orleans, we had moved into a part of New Orleans that where white flight had occurred. So I came into those questions around justice pretty early, and I kept those questions that curiosity about justice all the way through, college. And when I transferred to UCLA, that was the fall of 1996, Prop 209, was on the ballot, and you really couldn't, at that point, you couldn't really ignore policy when you're talking about questions of justice, especially racial justice. So took an greater interest in policy. And at some point I knew that I wanted to make policy. And the question was whether, as a policymaker running for office, what kind of policy do you want to make? And as you're going through those questions, a lot of it is, as you know, is what will motivate you to ask your friends for donations, to ask strangers for money? What will motivate you to go to a bus stop and talk to a stranger and ask them to vote for you, right? So those type of questions lead you to say, well, what do I really care about? What do I want to do with this power that I have, or that you're seeking in this public service role? And naturally, those questions came back to, for me, the value of education policy in my life, the value of places like City College and other community colleges, in the role of advancing economic opportunity and justice in the lives of so many families. Obviously affected, me as a first generation college graduate, but also, my mother had the benefit of vocational education to get ahead in her life. My father went to community college to become an auto body repair technician. My wife went to City College of San Francisco, and it really saved her, and she ended up transferring to Mills and then on to Stanford. So for me, the question was, if I'm going to spend this time and make this effort and ask my friends and strangers for money or for a vote, what motivates you? What would motivate me to do that? And it led me to finding that type of work at City College of San Francisco. That's how I ended up on the board. I ran in 2008, got reelected in 2012, and learned a great deal about policymaking, but especially learned a lot about being an advocate for underrepresented communities on that board. So it's great that I was able to stay in the work, do my profession, but also now on the Student Aid Commission to carry the same type of values to this body as well.
Can you share with us a little bit more about your experience while you were a trustee at San Francisco City College, and maybe some of the issues that you also championed while you were there, some priority things that that you saw in higher ed that you really wanted to uplift?
Yeah, I think, working with faculty advocates, administrators who really champion equity, and of course, students, the framework there was, what do the students need, right? Like actually learning from them, understanding what their needs were, and what were the barriers to their success, whatever it may be. And, I came on to City College, to the board, and there had been a lot of work done by longtime faculty advocates, Sue Homer, and a lot of her cohort, really trying to push forward these questions to a governing board that hadn't quite, found the kind of capacity yet to move forward with curriculum reform, placement testing reform, those type of questions, because they really implicate a lot of political questions and economic questions. And what I learned was that, number one, it's always a good idea to start policymaking in this space, especially by asking what the students need. Why are you there? The second thing was, understanding how to mechanically take those concepts and turn them into policy. And I think one of the, I wouldn't say lessons, but a reminder was that, you go into this work wanting to represent underrepresented communities, and you realize that that's, by definition, you're going to have, you're working from a political deficit, meaning that when you're on the board, no one is calling you. There is no advocacy group for Black and brown students and their graduation rates or their financial needs. There's no one in the political, in the polity, that is saying, we got to make sure we're going to hold you accountable if you don't vote this way on, remedial education reform or placement testing. That's also true when you're running for office. When you're running for office, there isn't an endorsement committee process or PAC money or mobilizations for these underserved communities. That's why they're not represented in our politics. So I think one of the primary lessons was understanding that, really grappling with that dynamic and trying to work with it and trying to find ways to, through either messaging and of course through messaging, organizing, and on the merits of policy, pushing forward these notions, the reforms that students themselves are saying that they want. So I think that that's a lesson I think advocates for equity and advocates for people who are underrepresented in our political system should take to heart. I took to heart my 8 years there on the board.
Absolutely. I mean, I think part of the reason why us here at the campaign have appreciated your voice so much is because you have, prioritized student voice and really, listening and being receptive to their needs. And, as you just shared, there's so much of there's a lack of really political strength that students have to kind of influence a lot of these conversations. So, thank you. It's really powerful that you did that both on the college board and now that you're continuing to do that right in this new role at CSAC. I also just want to pause to remind the audience watching that if you have any questions for Steve, to please put them in the Q&A and submit your questions by 12:30. So you guys have 15 more minutes. So now that you all have been, or now that you've been selected to serve on the Student Aid Commission, could you kind of give us a quick elevator pitch of what the Student Aid Commission does?
Sure. And before I do that, I want to also say that, the campaign is really has been that voice throughout the state. And that's why I so much value the work that you all do there. It would be great if you could, we could have campaigns in every college district in the state, holding our policymakers to account to ensure that we're doing the best thing for students. The commission administers over $2 billion of aid, Cal Grant, all types of like the California Dream Act, AB 540 aid, various programs that are state-based, state-funded, and it's really a great agency. And the mission is to give money to our students. You can't say no to work like that. So I'm really honored to be a part of it, really honored to be working with my fellow commissioners on this work, our ED, Marlene Garcia, our chair, Catalina Fuentes. They're really great. All the commissioners are great, and they're all very student centered, and it's great to be working with folks like that, because that vision, that shared vision, means that you're working from political strength to advance policy for our neediest students.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's likely part of the reason too why we have so many students on this call as well. They definitely recognize the power and the influence of CSAC. So as a newly appointed commissioner, what issues are you hoping to champion when it comes to financial aid access?
I think for me, it's important to recognize the work that's already been done and the momentum that's already been built by advocates such as the campaign, and obviously leadership, past and present leadership on the commission. And that to me is Cal Grant reform. And learning as a member of the board at City, but and taking that approach here, a lot of these policies that we have in place, they are human constructs, right? And they were made by us, and they can be remade by us. And to me, the work of the commission in the last couple of years on Cal Grant reform is really is the most imperative, that we find a way to make that a reality, because these constructs that were made don't apply anymore. And in fact, it's too bureaucratic and not fitting for the times and the reality of a lot of our students who are left out of these public funds. And it's really essentially a question of justice, and these students being left out when there's no reason for these students to be left out of these funds, but for the fact that the statutes are written a certain way, that these policies were devised a certain way at a time that didn't really foresee or should have foreseen the impact on students left out now. And to me, Cal Grant reform really implicates these equity questions across the board, and speak to questions about what our state's values are. If we are recognizing that higher education attainment is necessary for the competitiveness of our economy, for addressing economic inequality, for ensuring that we have a state that is working well for everyone, that has to ultimately follow with where we put our money, and how we put our money to fund those aspirations. And we're behind. Like we actually have to match our policies. We have to align our policies with what we understand to be our vision and what we need as a state. So if we recognize those values and those priorities as a state, how do we conform then the rest of our policymaking apparatus, our bureaucracy, to that vision? And Cal Grant reform is long overdue. And to me, the fundamental questions of equity and fairness and economic competitiveness really should focus on those questions. You're talking about undocumented students who really should not be left out of financial aid. That's bureaucratic error. It doesn't make sense. You're talking about a lot of a disproportionate number of them, of students left out of Cal Grant, are community college students. And so who are those students? Those are students who are most underserved. You're talking about a lot of formerly incarcerated students, a lot of working class students, immigrants, children of immigrants. if that is happening, if we know that is the population that is being left out of state aid, then the question for us is, you know, remaking those policies to ensure broader access to our educations of higher learning in the state. That's fully consistent with what we should be doing, that everyone recognizes we should be doing on a state level. Now the question is, can we align it? And I think that is the number one objective should be the number one objective of the commission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we at the campaign definitely agree with you on a number of those points, especially the much needed Cal Grant reform that I feel like we've been discussing now for the last couple of years. I was going to ask you about what you see as some major opportunities to make college affordability a reality for more Californians. I know you touched on, you know, a number of ways. I don't know if you have anything else you would like to share, and, you know, also what do you kind of see as major obstacles to those opportunities to really expanding college affordability here in California?
You know, I've been really fascinated with baby bonds as a policy issue, and I think that, you know, that's something that I'd love to look at some more. But I think Cal Grant reform is something that really should address a lot of the kind of low-hanging fruit out there that are barriers to our students. And I think if we can find a way to focus on that and get that done, that would be great. But, you know, I came into office at Citi at the start of the Great Recession, and you know, I know we had a lot of ambitions before the pandemic, and now we have to, you know, think about how we reframe those visions given the short-term deficit in funds. But I think the important thing is that as we grapple with that we ensure that the neediest students are prioritized and that they get the resources they need to meet their educational goals.
Absolutely. So I think we'll have time for one more question, and then after that, we'll go ahead and shift over to the audience Q&A. But as a former community college, you know that as a former community college trustee, that community college students receive the smallest financial aid awards, and many community college students go unfunded and they can't access the entitlement Cal Grant, which you had just touched upon, because they've been out of high school for more than 2 years at their time of enrollment. Do you think that in particular needs to change? I know you've kind of touched on a number of things with Cal Grant reform, but.
Absolutely, and I think the Sears report, you know, the survey of student expenses that came out recently really highlights the disparity because of course, it brings a question into a focus onto cost of living, right? And the gap between tuition and cost of living, obviously at community colleges relative to UC is a lot larger. And, you know, community colleges don't have land and dorms. So housing, for example, is a much more of an inherent burden for students at community colleges. And I think that, you know, if we're really going to ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity to pursue their educational goals, if we're going to be mindful of these questions of inequity in our state, and if a lot of underrepresented communities are community colleges, we have to align those priorities properly. And again, this to me as a policy matter is low-hanging fruit, right? These are constructs that were made by us that can be remade by us. So yes, I think that there needs to be a shift in thinking around to follow obviously the work that everyone else has been working on to ensure that there is fair access for students at community colleges if we're really committed to questions of equity in the state.
Great, excellent. I couldn't agree with you more. So we're going to go ahead and shift over to our audience questions, and we have a couple of here in the chat box. The first one is from Zulika Bravo, and she says, "Thank you for your service, Steve. I'm a parenting student at UCLA and have been advocating for better funding for parenting students. I'm excited to see some of the changes in the Student Aid Commission with expanding Cal Grants for student parents. My question is, we have been having issues where financial aid cuts off some of the school-funded parenting grants because they said that we cannot have a school-funded grant with the Cal Grant. Is this true or possibly an issue of miscommunication?"
I honestly, I don't know. And I think that's we should chase that down. So if you want to email me or call me, I'm happy to discuss it with you and connect you with staff at the commission. But I'm never in favor of cutting off funds unnecessarily. So if there's a way for us to change that, we should change it. Thank you for your question.
Okay, our next question is from Vanessa Moreno. She says, "What actions are needed to address the financial aid inequity for undocumented students? Because we know, although they receive the California Dream Act, they're receiving half the financial aid compared to their peers."
Yeah, I wonder to what extent that likely has to do with the Cal Grant reform we've been talking about, right? And given that there are these constructs of eligibility in existing Cal Grant, why? Like, why are they there? And what was the vision for the policymakers when they put it there? Is it sustainable now? And the answer obviously is not. But to the extent that that is having a disproportionate impact on undocumented students, it is every more reason to change it. And I know that advocates, certainly commissioners, recognize that there are barriers, that there are policy changes in the Cal Grant system that should change because they are leaving out, they are denying access to these funds to undocumented students unfairly. And my hope is that the Cal Grant reform that we can all get behind will address that issue and that inequity is no longer present.
And we have another question from our very own Audrey Dow. So she says, "Hello, Steve. What do you think are the opportunities that California has with the Biden administration?"
The first thing that came to mind was FAFSA reform, and obviously expanding the Pell Grant. But I wonder whether we should be more aggressive and thinking about these ideas and advancing these ideas now, especially the commission, as we gear up for the transition in January. But I'm certainly more excited. I'm certainly more excited now than I was, 6 months ago. So I think there are a lot of opportunities, and I hope to work with all of you on them.
I can definitely agree with you about feeling much more excited now than I did before. So I think many of us in the higher ed world are definitely feeling that, just the world of opportunities that has opened up. So we have another question from our folks here at the campaign. There's been so much discussion about the total cost of college and how we need to think differently about financial aid in general, namely that it must go beyond tuition and fees and really address this idea of the cost of living, the real cost of college, if you will. Given the global pandemic and looming recession, how much progress do you think we can make to address cost of living?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last part again?
How much progress do you think we can make to address cost of living?
I think number one is we need to keep on talking about it. We need to keep on reminding people, policymakers and the public at large, that education costs aren't just tuition and fees. We are talking about what it takes to live, to study. You can't you can't go to class if you don't have a place to live and you can't afford food. And Sears confirmed a lot of that. So I think we just have to start narrating what people have known for a long time, and that is, how do you actually get the educational goals that you aspire to? What do you need to do that? And a lot of that is cost of living. It's the basis for a lot of basis for the explosion in student loan debt. And I think that when we have an honest, consistent assessment around what it really takes to expand opportunity or access to college for everyone, it has to account for all costs, not just tuition and fees. I think that's just a narration issue that, again, that inform constructs and policy that you see in the Cal Grant system that's just not true today. And that whatever that narrative was that formulated that construct for the existing Cal Grant system has to change in order to create a different construct through Cal Grant reform.
Okay. So we have another question here, and this is actually an idea that had come from some of our partners over at A2Mend and Emoji. What do you think of the idea of creating a portable Cal Grant specifically for Black students looking to study at an HBCU, since there isn't currently one in California?
Yeah, I'm open to it. I like the idea of giving students the. I mean, if I think the mission should be funding the educational goals of our people, and if that takes them to DC or Georgia or Tennessee, I think we should be open to that, and I would love to explore that concept some more.
Great, awesome. We have a couple more final questions, and then after that, we'll get to our lightning round at the end.
Okay.
So beyond California, what more do you think the federal government can do to expand financial aid, reduce debt, and support graduates trying to manage debt?
I think I read somewhere that Experian said that the student loan debt in California in 2019 was like $133 billion. And that doubled in 10 years. I'm encouraged, and this goes back to Audrey's question, I'm encouraged by talk about executive action to eliminate debt, student debt. That to me is an outgrowth of the need to understand the real cost of education. And that's why I think this Cal Grant reform is so important to deal with, obviously, equity, but also talk about these looming larger macroeconomic questions of debt. And I think you're starting to hear from, you had heard from a lot of progressive voices, but more recently now we'll talk about some possible actions in the Biden administration of how that type of debt burden is overwhelming for a lot of families, a lot of working families, and all for chasing their educational goals, which is good for our economy. So the question then is, how do we recognize what that problem is in the context of our larger policy goals and treat it accordingly? I think focusing on student debt and the causes of that debt should also be a priority for policymakers in this space, but also for policymakers at large, right? Because that number is big, and that's a big number for debt, and certainly has an impact on our economy.
Great. And at the end of your term, what would feel like success to you once you come to the end of your term at CSAC? What are some maybe some goals that you have?
I think, like I said before, I think if we can get some Cal Grant reform done, in a meaningful way, that would really mean a lot, because that to me is something that we should be able to do. I know obviously cost is the question that we have to grapple with, but again, it's about, I think, aligning our values in the education space with our values in at large that the state espouses. So I think that if that can happen, great. And to the extent that we can get students more aid, any extra dollar more to me is a success.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't agree more. We have our final question from Elaf Usaf, and they want to know, what do you think is the most effective way to hold systems accountable?
I love that question. So it's to me, in a democracy, you need to count, and I think on the front end, people ultimately, I believe, have the power to hold systems accountable, and that's what elections are for. And part of that is making sure that we can tell stories about what policy issues are at stake, so that the electorate, that the people, can decide for themselves what they want and how they want to hold institutions accountable. On the back end, the question then is, when you're in these roles as a policymaker, do you have the votes to actually move and force institutions to account? And do you have that capacity in a way that you can actually effectuate policies? Like, do you understand how a bureaucracy functions? So I think it takes, ultimately persistent engagement and a vibrant democratic system, which of course our higher education system helps create, and strong leaders, which I know the campaign also helps build. So hopefully we can keep it going and keep doing the work that's so important for everyone on this call.
Alrighty, so we're going to shift for a moment over to our lightning round questions. So, first one's first. We'll go ahead and choose between a couple of these. So, coffee or tea?
Yeah, like 3 cups of coffee.
Coffee. Okay, what's in your Netflix queue currently?
We've been watching the David Letterman interviews, his show, I think. I'm not sure what it's called, but my wife and I really loved Mindy Kaling's series, Never Have I Ever. We can't wait for season 2 to come out. We just love that series. So I recommend it if you haven't seen it.
Awesome, I'll have to check that out. Dodgers or the Giants?
Giants. Congrats.
I know we have folks in our LA team.
I'm surveying the region, the survey answers for region. I'm thinking, okay, 19 Bay Area. Okay, so.
Our LA folks in the chat box are saying, go Dodgers. Very cool. What's your go-to snack?
Popcorn.
Popcorn. Awesome. Same here. Okay.
Yeah, I add a little nutritional yeast and some other seasonings, but easy.
What is your favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Christmas. Oh my goodness, you must be so excited.
I always ask my wife how soon it is I can start playing Christmas songs. Internal debate, raging internal debate in this household.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Come November 1st, I was playing.
November 1st, thank you. Yes.
What's your most used emoji?
I use the heart emoji a lot, and I use the hands, the praise emoji. I want to spread love and praise to everyone out there. So.
Both positive ones. I like it. Very cool. What's your best quarantine survival tip?
I got got these noise canceling earbuds, headphones. You know, I as I told you earlier, we're in a small 2-bedroom flat here in the city, and we've got 2 workspaces, my wife and me, and a 3rd grade class and a 2nd grade class and a 4th grade class going on at the same time. So those noise canceling headphones come in very handy.
Yeah, I think everyone that lives in a multi-person household should probably get some of that. What's the last book you read?
The last book I read was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong, who is a poet, is a queer Viet writer, and I just love the book. It's about the fragility of life, about trauma, and about joy, and all in one. So you can imagine kind of going through that. He was very gifted writer, and I recommend it to all of you.
Good. I'll have to check that out. What is your most common thought that you have before you go to sleep?
Often thinking about my kids before I go to sleep. And for a while, I've been thinking about, I think like all of us were thinking about the election, the presidential election for a while. So, and of course, football here and there.
Very cool. All righty. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Steve. I really appreciate it. And it was great chatting with you. And we're also looking forward to the ongoing work that you're going to be doing for California students. And a big thank you to all of those of you who joined us today, both on the Zoom call and virtually via Facebook. We appreciate you being present, and we hope all of you can join us for the next, for our next and final 2 events in our speaker series, our 2020 Champions of Higher Education Awards, and event next Thursday with Secretary of State Alex Padilla and Assembly Member Mark Berman, and our 16th anniversary event with UC President Michael Drake, CSU Chancellor-elect Joseph Castro, and California Community College Chancellor Eloy Oakley. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. And then Steve, I know there were a couple of students that were interested in connecting with you beyond this call. I don't know if you want to go ahead and just share out the email that you have with CSAC so those students can reach you.
Yes, you can email me at shn@protonmail.com. S as in Steve, H as in Harry, N as in my last name, at protonmail.com, and I'm happy to connect with you and keep engaging. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out of your day to have lunch with me, and thank you for the campaign for inviting me to sit down and talk about all of this stuff. So I appreciate all of your inspiring advocacy and everyone's interest in higher ed policy.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to working with you, Steve. I hope you have an excellent rest of your week.
You too. Take care, everybody. Take care.